The sun was lowering itself behind the distant mesas, smearing the sky with streaks of gold and rose. Evening settled over the ranch like a soft blanket, cooling the heat of the long day. Mara wiped her hands on her worn trousers and tightened the last latch on the stable door. She always stayed late. She preferred the quiet of dusk when most workers had already gone inside, leaving her free from the eyes that made her shrink into herself. Mara had never believed she was beautiful. Years of offhand comments, teasing from village children, and her own harsh mirror convinced her she was a playing shadow among brighter faces. She grew used to working in silence, to folding into corners, to pretending she didn't mind being unseen. On this particular evening, she wasn't alone. Calder Briggs, the wandering cowboy who arrived that morning seeking work, leaned against the fence, watching the last of the horses settle. He had the look of a man shaped by the road-broad shoulders, weathered skin, and eyes the color of a storm about to break. Mara had spoken to him only briefly when the ranch owner introduced them, but even in that short moment he had looked at her differently, directly, calmly, without that faint flicker of judgment others often carried. She tried to walk past him unnoticed, but Calder seemed to recognize the way she shrank, as though she were trying to fold into the dusk. "Long day?" he asked softly. She startled slightly. "Just finishing up." Calder didn't crowd her. Instead, he simply rested his arms on the fence and watched the cattle grazing in the fading light. Something about his stillness made her pause. Perhaps it was because he didn't stare at her the way people usually did, quick glance, conclusion made, eyes turning away. For a moment, neither spoke. The cool breeze carried the earthy scent of hay and wild sage. A quiet calmness settled between them. Mara wasn't sure what prompted her to speak, maybe the loneliness of the evening, maybe the strange gentleness in the cowboy's voice, but the words slipped out before she could catch them. "I'm not pretty." She whispered it like a confession, but also like a fact carved long ago into her bones. Calder didn't glance at her in surprise. He didn't laugh or disagree out of politeness. Instead, he lifted his eyes toward the horizon as though searching for the right response among the dying colors of the sky. "That's okay," he finally replied, his tone low and steady. "I'm not looking for pretty." She turned to him, confusion flickering across her features. Calder continued, voice quiet but firm. "I need honesty, not ostentation." The word ostentation caught her off guard. It wasn't a word men around here used. But she understood what he meant. He valued what wasn't decorated, pretended, or polished. And for the first time in years, someone had told her that the one thing she always feared, her plainness, might not be a flaw, but a truth he respected. Mara didn't know what to say. She only knew the evening felt different now, as if a door she'd never noticed had quietly cracked open. The days that followed Calder's quiet declaration of honesty passed with a kind of gentle tension. Mara kept herself busy in the ranch, tending to the horses and mending fences, but she noticed Calder more than she wanted to admit. He was competent, calm, and steady in a way that contrasted sharply with the rest of the bustling ranch hands. Every task he undertook seemed to radiate efficiency and respect for the land, and Mara could not help but admire him from a distance. But admiration was dangerous territory. She had long convinced herself that men like Calder didn't notice girls like her, or, worse, that if they did, it never lasted. Calder, for his part, sensed Mara's quiet observation. He didn't rush her. He didn't attempt to charm her with jokes or idle talk. Instead, he offered simple gestures, handing her a tool when her hands were full, offering an encouraging nod when she struggled with a stubborn horse, or sharing small insights about the land. These actions, though unspoken, carried more weight than words. Calder had learned from experience that honesty and integrity were far more enduring than charm or flirtation. The road had taught him to recognize depth in people quickly, and he recognized it in Mara. One evening, as the golden light of sunset spilled across the paddocks, Mara found herself in the barn, carefully brushing down a young colt. Calder appeared, leaning against a beam, watching her work silently. There was no expectation in his gaze, only patience. After a few moments he spoke, his voice quiet, yet carrying a weight that pulled Mara's attention from the horse to him. "Why so quiet?" he asked. Mara hesitated. Few had ever asked her that question. Most assumed she preferred silence. The truth was more complicated. Her quietness had been armor, a shield built over years of feeling invisible, overlooked, and unworthy of attention. I don't know how to say things sometimes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or maybe I've learned it's better not to." Calder nodded slowly, understanding more than she expected. "I know what it's like to carry things inside," he said, "to feel the world won't notice if you speak the truth. But some truths are worth letting out." There it was again, his emphasis on honesty, not appearances. Mara found herself strangely comforted by his words. Here was a man shaped by hardship, yet untouched by judgment, a man who valued her mind and her spirit more than how she looked. And for the first time, she felt the walls she had built around herself starting to shift, crack even, under the weight of his gentle presence. Over the next several days, brief exchanges in the barn or while feeding the horses became moments of connection. Mara shared fragments of her childhood. Mornings spent tending to chores before anyone else woke. Nights spent listening to the wind, learning to observe rather than be observed. Calder revealed little of his past, but enough to hint at a life full of wandering, loss, and learn the hard way. Through these shared confidences, trust began to grow, a fragile thread linking the two of them across quiet spaces, dust-laden paddocks, and the slow, steady rhythm of the ranch. By the end of the week, Mara sensed something new stirring within her, a feeling she had long suppressed, one that was not fear or self-doubt but a tentative hope. Perhaps someone could see her, not just her plain face or her timid posture, but the truth of who she was. And perhaps in Calder she had found someone who wanted exactly that. Life at the ranch had settled into a steady rhythm, but the peace was fragile. Mara and Calder's quiet bond had begun to blossom in subtle ways, shared glances, unspoken understanding, and moments of laughter while working the horses, but the world outside their small moments of connection had its own plans. Ranch life, with its small-town gossip and competitive energy, had little patience for quiet souls like Mara or wandering cowboys like Calder. And as it often does, change arrived in the form of someone who could not resist stirring the calm. Lyndall Gray was everything Calder was not, flashy, confident, and brimming with arrogance. He arrived at the ranch one bright morning, hired temporarily to help with the harvest. His boots shone too clean, his hat tilted at just the right angle, and his smile carried a self-assured charm that immediately caught the attention of many. To Mara, he was unnerving, loud, intrusive, and impossible to ignore. To Calder, he was a challenge, though not the sort he would seek out. Lyndall's nature made conflict unavoidable. It didn't take long for the tension to reveal itself. One afternoon, while Mara was gathering hay, Lyndall approached, leaning against the fence with a smirk. "You don't belong in the sun, do you?" Too pale, too quiet. "Not much to look at," he teased, loud enough for others to hear. Laughter echoed from nearby ranch hands. Mara's face burned, and she felt a familiar desire to vanish, to shrink into the shadows. Calder, who had been mending a fence nearby, straightened. He walked over with deliberate calm, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Leave her be, Gray," he said, his voice quiet but firm, carrying a weight that silenced the nearby workers. "She's got more grit than you'll ever know." Lyndall laughed, unconcerned. "Oh, I'm sure she's just a shy little thing," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "No harm in a bit of fun, right?" Calder's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, close enough that the small crowd held its breath. "Fun at someone else's expense isn't fun, it's cowardice. Best learn the difference before you speak again." Mara, watching this unfold, felt a surge of gratitude mixed with unease. Calder had defended her, but now the attention of the entire ranch seemed to press down upon her. She worried that she had caused trouble simply by existing in the world, as though her plainness and quiet nature had invited ridicule. For a moment, she considered retreating into her old habits of silence and avoidance. But something in Calder's calm, unshakable demeanor anchored her. Unlike others who had mocked her for years, he wasn't trying to make her stronger in words alone. He was showing her she already possessed strength, simply by being herself. Rumors began to ripple through the ranch, as they always do. Whispers about Calder defending the quiet girl, about Lyndall's sharp tongue, and about who would come out on top circulated among the workers. Some admired Mara's courage, others dismissed it. The tension grew, a tangible thread pulling at every interaction. By the time evening fell, Mara understood something crucial. The world wouldn't change to make her feel safe. But Calder's presence reminded her she didn't have to face it alone. And as much as the spotlight made her uncomfortable, it also revealed a truth she had long avoided. She had a voice, and sometimes it deserved to be heard. The sky darkened unnaturally fast that evening. Clouds rolling in with a suddenness that caught the ranch hands off guard, the wind whipped through the paddocks, bending trees and tossing dust across the land like dry, angry snow. Mara, already weary from the day's labor, felt a tightening in her chest as the first heavy drops began to fall. The storm was not just rain, it was a warning, an upheaval of everything that had felt safe and predictable. By the time the full fury of the storm descended, the ranch was in chaos. Horses whinnied in fear, bolted from their pens, and the barns creaked under the onslaught of wind and rain. Calder moved through it all like a calm eye in the storm, rounding up frightened animals and directing the ranch hands with practiced authority. Mara wanted to help, and she did, but she quickly realized the extent of the danger when she noticed a young foal trapped under a collapsed section of the shed roof. Without thinking, Mara ran toward it, rain plastering her hair to her face and mud soaking her boots. She crawled under the timbers, heart hammering, hands trembling as she tried to lift the debris. The weight was too much for her alone. The shed groaned ominously, threatening to collapse further. Panic surged through her, but she couldn't leave the helpless animal behind. From the other side of the field, Calder spotted her struggle. Without hesitation, he charged through the storm, mud sucking at his boots, rain blinding him momentarily. He reached her in a few long strides, his hands strong and sure as he lifted part of the debris to free the foal. Mara gasped, exhausted and terrified, as Calder pulled her to safety, shielding her with his body from the relentless wind and rain. Soaked and shivering, they huddled together under the lean-to of the barn. Mara's teeth chattered, but it wasn't just the cold her fear and adrenaline still raced through her veins. She looked up at Calder, her eyes wide and vulnerable, and for the first time allowed herself to speak the truth she had kept buried for years. The terror, the loneliness, the constant sense of being unworthy. Words poured out of her like a dam breaking, trembling and halting, yet unfiltered. Calder listened, silently, his hand resting on her shoulder, steadying her not just physically but emotionally. When she finally faltered, spent from the torrent of emotion, he spoke. His voice was low, grounding, and unwavering. "Mara, you've shown more courage tonight than most ever will. Beauty? It's nothing compared to the strength you've just displayed. That strength, that honesty, that's what matters." In that moment, something shifted. Mara realized that what she had always feared, her plainness, her perceived insignificance, was meaningless in the face of courage and compassion. Calder had not judged her, had not flinched, had not looked away. And she understood, with a clarity she had never known, that she mattered not for how she looked, but for who she was, for what she could do, and for the heart she carried. The storm eventually passed, leaving the land drenched and glistening, the air heavy and clean. But Mara and Calder emerged changed. The night of the storm had done more than rescue a foal, it had dismantled walls, forged trust, and marked the beginning of a bond deeper than either had anticipated. In the days following the storm, the ranch seemed quieter, almost reflective, as if the land itself had paused to recover from the tempest. Mara walked differently, now no longer with the habit of shrinking into shadows, but with a subtle awareness of her own strength. The night of the storm had changed something inside her. She had faced fear, acted with courage, and survived. For the first time in years, she realized she could be more than the quiet, unnoticed girl she had always believed herself to be. Calder remained a steady presence by her side, though he never forced himself into her life. He worked alongside her in the fields, tended the horses, and offered quiet words of guidance when she struggled. His respect for her independence never wavered, and Mara felt a growing trust in him, a comfort she had never allowed herself before. The bond they shared was no longer just a fragile thread in the background of the ranch. It had become a foundation upon which she could begin to rebuild her sense of self. Tension still lingered from Lyndall Gray's earlier mockery, though the man had begun to realize that Mara was not as easily intimidated as before. In the past, she would have avoided confrontation, ducked behind others, or pretended the insult didn't sting. But now, emboldened by the confidence Calder had helped her find, she faced Lyndall one afternoon as he attempted another sly comment about her quiet nature. "I don't need anyone to speak for me," she said, her voice steady, carrying over the barnyard noise. "And I certainly don't need your approval." A hush fell over the nearby workers. Lyndall blinked, momentarily taken aback. He had underestimated her, and Calder, standing a few feet away, allowed a small, approving smile to appear. Mara felt a surge of pride, not because of the attention, but because she had finally spoken her truth. As Mara continued to grow in confidence, Calder began to notice another change, the subtle ways he found himself thinking about her, beyond the admiration for her courage or the satisfaction of seeing her succeed. He realized he cared for her, deeply and quietly, in a way that unsettled him. It wasn't just her strength that drew him in, but her honesty, her resilience, and the way she navigated the world with quiet grace. Yet he also sensed her lingering insecurity, the shadows of self-doubt that she carried like an old coat. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky blushed with color, Calder found Mara watching the horizon from the fence line. The air was calm, warm from the day's sun, and the moment felt intimate. Calder approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "You've changed," he said softly, as if speaking to the land as much as to her, not in looks, but in spirit. "You're stronger than you know, braver than you give yourself credit for." Mara's eyes flicked to him, unsure how to respond. Words failed her, but in her heart she understood the meaning. She had always feared being overlooked, but now she saw that strength, courage, and honesty had a power all their own, one that even Calder, with all his experience, could not ignore. That evening marked the beginning of a new chapter for Mara. She began to understand that the world might never fully accept her quiet nature or her plain appearance, but with Calder by her side, she could embrace the truth of her own heart. And in doing so, she began to realize that love, courage, and honesty mattered far more than any fleeting notion of beauty. The ranch had finally settled into a rhythm of peace after the storm, the dust settling back onto the paths and fences, the livestock returning to a calmer routine. But for Mara and Calder, calm was no longer simply a reflection of the land, it was an opportunity for truths long held to emerge. Unspoken words finally finding their moment. The bond that had grown quietly over weeks of shared labor, small confessions, and moments of courage now hovered on the precipice of something deeper, something neither of them could ignore any longer. One evening, under a sky lit with thousands of stars, Calder found Mara sitting on the fence where they had first spoken weeks ago. The horizon glowed faintly in the west. The last remnants of sunlight fading into deep indigo, she looked out across the ranch, quiet and thoughtful, as though searching for answers in the open fields. Calder approached slowly, careful to respect the fragile space she had built around herself. yet driven by a need to speak the truth he could no longer withhold. "Mara," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence without disturbing the peace. She turned to him, eyes reflecting the starlight, and for a moment neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of grass and earth, of rain recently past, and in that quiet, everything felt suspended. Time itself seemed to wait for the conversation that was about to unfold. Calder took a step closer, his gaze steady and unflinching. "I've seen the strength you carry," he began, "and the honesty you live by. I've seen you face fear, protect others, and speak truths even when it's hard, and I've realized something. I care for you, Mara, not for how you look, not for what the world might consider beauty, but for who you are and how you move through life with courage and heart." Mara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded in her chest, both from the sudden confession and the weight of emotions she had long buried. She had never allowed herself to believe that someone like Calder, someone capable, steady, and honest, could see her for who she truly was and still care. I don't know if I deserve that," she whispered, voice trembling. "I've spent so long thinking I was invisible, that I wasn't enough, that I didn't matter." Calder reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You've always mattered," he said, his words quiet but filled with certainty. "You've just never had someone who noticed. And I do. I see you, Mara. Every part of you, the courage, the honesty, the heart, and I wouldn't trade any of it for the world." Tears threatened to spill down Mara's cheeks, not from fear or pain, but from relief and wonder. For the first time, she felt truly seen, truly accepted. She realized that her fears of inadequacy had been shadows, and Calder's presence was the light that showed her how unfounded those fears had been. Slowly, she leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder, allowing herself to believe in the possibility of love, of connection, of being valued for exactly who she was. The night stretched around them like a protective embrace. Stars glimmered above, silent witnesses to their confession. Words were no longer necessary. In their shared silence, in the warmth of their closeness, Mara and Calder understood what had always been true. Honesty and courage, not appearances or pretense, were the foundations of a bond that could endure. And under that open sky, Mara finally allowed herself to believe she had found a place where she belonged, seen, valued, and loved exactly as she was. Calder's quiet smile mirrored her relief and joy, and together they began a journey built not on fleeting beauty, but on the lasting truth of hearts intertwined.